Hi students. So this movie presentation or video presentation is going to be about APUSH Period 3. And APUSH Period 3 goes from 1754 until 1800. And why we start at 1754 is because it's the start of this French and Indian War. Now, if we're going back into the French and Indian War, if you remember, there's going to be a feud in the Ohio River Valley between the French and the British over trading rights, specifically beaver trading rights. And the French and Indian War is going to be an offshoot of the 7 Years' War that's going to be happening in Europe. So kind of keep that in mind as we're going on with this. Now, the two sides are going to be the French and the Native Americans versus the British. And how this whole starts off is that this whole war starts off is that a young Virginian named George Washington is going to go into this Ohio River Valley to try to take over some of the trading rights. Loses the battle. There we go. Now, for APUSH, just keep in mind when it comes to wars, they don't go over a lot, or they don't really focus on too much of the battles or anything like that, or military strategies. It's going to be more of the causes and effects that are going through. In this case, a major effect of the French and Indian War is that France is completely knocked out, and they're going to have this revenge or this vengefulness that's going to come towards the British. So the main thing now in 1763, and this is when the peace treaty is signed that ends the French and Indian War, is that now the King George, passes the Proclamation of 1763. And what the Proclamation of 1763 really does is that it stops and he declares that none of the settlers or American colonists should cross the Appalachian Mountains in order to settle. And the reasons why he did that is because first, he didn't want to pay for the military soldiers there, and second, he was also afraid that the colonists would be attacked by Native Americans, since there was still a lot of Native Americans that were living there that were going to be anti-British. The way that the colonists took this is that, wait a second, what about this solitary neglect that these, England was going to leave these colonies alone? So these colonials start acting as if they're, the teenagers rebelling against the parents in this case, which is going to be the king. So they're going to do whatever they're going to do. So while this is all happening, Parliament, Prime Minister, King George, they all kind of come together and they're like, you know what? We have a lot of war debt from this war. We owe a lot of people. We need to also keep a military standing in the colonies. Since we got to pay for the military in the colonies, why don't we tax the colonies? Okay, if we tax them, then they will be able to pay for the soldiers that are protecting them. In this case, it became the Stamp Act, or at least that was just one of the major acts that comes in here. And the Stamp Act, puts, stamps on paper, and then people were just paying, for the paper and whatnot. And there was some protest, and starts the Stamp Act Congress, in which is one of the first times that these colonies are all coming together to try to come up with a solution on what to do about these taxes. And what the colonies really come up with is that, what about our representation into Parliament? If we have representation, then we won't mind as much to be taxed. So, even though nothing really comes out of the Stamp Act Congress, it's just this idea of protesting and this taxation without representation is what really comes out of this. So there's going to be protest groups, specifically in New England, the Sons of Liberty, John Hancock, and Samuel Adams. They're really going to be the forces of this rebellious movement. So things that they do, they protest the Tea Act eventually with the Boston Tea Party, and in the Boston Massacre, they're just rebel rousers and whatnot. And there's going to be all sorts of different taxes that are going on. But like I said, the Tea Act with the Boston Tea Party, that effect of the Boston Tea Party really brings in the Intolerable Acts, which closes down Boston pretty much completely. There's going to be the Quartering Act that's going to be involved, where soldiers are going to be quartering into people's houses. And Patrick Henry of Virginia kind of sees like the writing on the wall, and he says that give me liberty or give me death. And really what he's talking about is, look, this war is going to happen whether we like it or not. Like, let's just go and be prepared. Now he's about 1 month, before anything even happens, and before that, the First Continental Congress said that if England does attack the colonies, we're going to go to war. By April of 1775, England tries to kill two birds with one stone. He tries to take over, the ammunition that they're holding in one of the towns, and then he's also trying to capture the Sons of Liberty. Now, with Lexington and Concord, what happens is that the Americans actually get a military victory and a moral victory, saying that, look, we can actually fight these people. So this was actually a pretty good thing. I mean, then it leads to, Bunker Hill, which is really Breed's Hill. But during that summer of 1775, the American colonists decide, and this is the Second Continental Congress, to send out the Olive Branch Petition. The idea behind the Olive Branch Petition was to try to have one last peace effort. And with this last peace effort, the idea behind it was to tell King George, look, we don't want to break away from England whatsoever. We just want you to admit that you're wrong and give us representation in Parliament. So King George says, yep, that's it, rips it up, throws up a confetti, starts dancing, and says, you know what, let's crush them. So 1776 comes around, and this is a big year politically and, for socially for the for what's going to be the United States of America, because in 1776 there's going to be a British man named Thomas Paine who actually writes a pamphlet called Common Sense, in which he says economically and socially and politically it makes common sense for the American colonies to become free and independent states. This is going to start to lead this independence movement, where in the summer of 1776, the Americans will sign and adopt the Declaration of Independence, declaring themselves free and independent from England. So these are all positive movements into the right direction. The thing is, the Continental Congress realized, and this is George Washington as well, that they're going to need foreign powers to back them up to legitimize their claim of being independent. The country that they really want is France. Reason why France is France is still a little bit salty from losing in the French and Indian War / 7 Years' War. So France is pretty much telling the United States, look, you guys got to prove to us you can win this thing. If you prove that you can win this thing, we'll help you out. Just as that's happening, the Americans win a very big battle called Saratoga. And when they win in Saratoga, the French are like, you know what? Let's go. And they give the Americans the Navy, and that's going to be the driving thing that's going to help the Americans win at the Battle of Yorktown. So at the peace treaty, what the United States now gets, first, they double their lands up into the Mississippi River. They get fishing rights. France gets parts of Canada, and England recognizes the United States as a legitimate country. That's all great and dandy, but now the Americans are like, okay, now that England's gone, what are we going to do now as a government? How are we going to govern ourselves? So they have this Articles of Confederation in place, and what a confederation is, it's a loose base of these states that are almost kind of ruling as independent, countries rather than one big country kind of all together. So the United States, in this case, the Congress, can't do anything. They can't tax anyone, can't create currency, can't regulate trade, can't have a military. It's pretty awful. There's no strong central government, no executive branch, no judicial system whatsoever. The only good thing is these land ordinances that they do have, the land ordinances that are going to make territories into new states. So that was a good thing. But the driving force that causes the United States to realize that they have to change is this thing called the Shay's Rebellion. And this is where Daniel Shays, a Massachusetts farmer, starts a rebellion, an uprising over debtors and taxes and how things weren't, good and whatnot. His rebellion fails, but it succeeds in that the United States decides to have a convention on revamping the government of the United States, in which they do. And you're going to have two sides of this. You have people that are strong central government people. They're going to be called Federalists. And then you have the other side, which are people that are going to be called Anti-Federalists, that are like, wait a second, we just got rid of a king. Why do we want a strong central government? In the end, the Federalists win, but there's going to be some compromises. Okay, you have the Great Compromise, in which they have, the smaller states have the Senate with equal participation, while the larger states will have the population with the House of Representatives. There's going to be a President of the United States, an executive branch. And, James Madison and Alexander Hamilton start writing these Federalist Papers and, getting people to support the Constitution. And it does support the Constitution. So then George Washington's elected president. And even though George Washington is not going to declare himself any specific political party, he will rule as a Federalist, or at least he will govern as a Federalist, in which he, everything he does isn't exactly an anti-Federalist. And he does have an all-star cast. John Adams is his vice president. Thomas Jefferson is his Secretary of State. Alexander Hamilton is his Secretary of Treasury. So you got this all-star, group that's there. And Hamilton, while he is the Secretary of Treasury, starts really putting into place Federalist ideas on how the economics should work. He promotes businesses. He wants to have trading partners with the British. He's all about people of New England and commerce, whereas Thomas Jefferson starts bringing up these new ideas of the Democratic Republicans, for the farmers, for the little people, siding with France rather than the British, even when the French Revolution comes out, siding with the people of France in general. And it's going to lead into, Thomas Jefferson kind of leaving his post as Secretary of State and everything like that. So George Washington, by the time his 8 years are done, he's able to try to remove Europe away from the Americas. And his farewell speech, he pretty much says no political parties. Political parties are the enemy. They are the reason why we're going to have splits in like the Civil War and possibly have a Civil War. And second, European problems, get out of here. We don't want to be part of Europe. Okay, and this is going to be a very good connection to things later down the road, like the Monroe Doctrine, the Roosevelt Corollary, Wilson and FDR, how they felt towards isolationist policies. It all kind of connects back to George Washington. So he leaves, John Adams comes in, and the main thing that you need to know about John Adams is that his vice president is Thomas Jefferson, who's a Democratic Republican, and John Adams is a Federalist, and they're butting heads, and they used to be best friends. John Adams passes something called the Alien and Sedition Act, in which he moves the immigration to become a citizen from 5 years to 14 years to try to eliminate people from voting. On the flip side, he's saying the Sedition Act, no, you can't talk bad about me. I don't care if it's true or not. You can't talk about me anymore, which is censoring, the press. Something else, remember John Peter Zenger, we had just talked about, in period 2, a very good connection here. You can also connect the Sedition Act to later times when we're talking about the Pentagon Papers during Vietnam, the Sedition and Espionage Act of World War I. So this is where these connections are coming in. And John Adams, while he's dealing with this, he's also dealing with this foreign policy issues where no one really wants to really give any respect to the United States. You have the XYZ affair, okay? And you have these Barbary pirates, and you have people that aren't exactly respecting the United States. So it's going to lead up into this election of 1800, where Thomas Jefferson and John Adams are actually going to start to be like butting heads, in which then it's going to change the way that politics is going to be. So keep in mind that this election of 1800 is huge, and that's why it's the start of period 4. So we're going to continue on with period 4 later. Just make sure if you want to subscribe, you can hit the subscribe button. If you want to keep on viewing on the playlist, you can click on the playlist. Other than that, good luck with your studying, and I'll see you next time.